My name is Doug Cohen, and today we're going to be talking about alcohol-related crimes and to make sure that we don't drink and drive with the holiday weekend coming up. We want you to make sure you're aware, you're informed, that you're smart, and that you're safe. And so with that said, I'm going to bring in Mark. Our plan was to do these on Mondays at noon. Sometimes scheduling is a factor, so we're here today, Wednesday, live at noon, and this will be up in the replay. So thanks for joining us, and here's Mark. Hey, Mark.
Hey, good afternoon, Doug.
What's going on? How you doing?
Good.
All right, so let's get right to it. Let's talk a little bit about why are we discussing this topic now, right? I mean, we have the holidays coming up. We have the 4th of July coming up anyway. So all of a sudden, drunk driving while intoxicated, alcohol-related crimes, they tend to spike a little around the holidays, right? And that's probably no coincidence. So talk about that a little bit. Like, why do we need to be talking about that now?
Sure. As good as enforcement has gotten over the years, as well as education and Mothers Against Drunk Driving, it's just a societal reality that there's going to be drinking and driving. And it really also corresponds with holidays as well. And something that we've touched on in prior shows was as it related to MIPs in youth. It's graduation season. It's prom season's over with now. There are a lot of graduation parties out that are going on right now, but it's 4th of July weekend coming up, and there's going to be a lot of drinking.
So, what are the types of things that you see? I mean, beyond just the obvious, because I know, like, I can just Google, drunk driving and hit the news tab, and boom, there seems to be tons of stories, right, about somebody just accidentally bumped into a state trooper because they were drunk driving. Somebody plowed into a store. What are the types of things that tend to happen, and what do you see as the most common, mistakes that people make that put them in these situations?
Well, that's a good question. Probably first and foremost is failure to plan. Anybody that's come into my office that has been charged with drunk driving, it wasn't their intention to go out that night, drink too much, and get pulled over and be charged with drunk driving. So, first, the best advice I can give anybody is if you're going to go out and drink, and the reality is when you're in a bar room or you're at a party, most people really aren't necessarily, unless you are not a drinker, just having the proverbial 2 drinks. They're having more than that. And then, unfortunately, when the night's over and they've been charged and they've been arrested and they're calling me the next day and they're feeling bad about what happened, they didn't set out to drink and drive. And what everybody forgets about with alcohol is that obviously alcohol impairs your judgment. So if you are a moderate to heavy drinker and you're going to start and you have more than 2 or 3 drinks, your brain's going to be impaired, and it often leads to more drinking than what people set out to. So first and foremost, if you plan on having a good time and drinking more than legitimate moderation of a couple of drinks, I highly recommend you call Uber or you have a designated driver and that person doesn't drink.
So we have a comment here from Richard Muller who says, if I, as a parent, if I have a party for the 4th of July and I discover my underage children and their friends had a drink or 2, am I liable?
Well, you very well could be, Doug, and I'd shut that down immediately. I live in a subdivision, and I'm amazed when I'm just driving through my neighborhood with all these graduation parties that there's bands in the backyard, the music's loud. It's a red flag for police. It upsets neighbors. And all you need is a police officer to stop by on a complaint, whether it be about the noise or too many people out front, and then they're going to investigate the party. And if you are a parent and you are hosting a party and there's underage drinking, yes, you clearly are exposed to some criminal liability with respect to that.
All right. So hopefully, Richard, that answered your question. So that's a very, I mean, that's, as a parent of teenagers myself, that's something that we've heard about and that we've had to be very cognizant of with our kids and with their friends over the last couple of years. And it's funny that even though that's something that's been, very relevant to us, it's not even something that was on my radar to discuss today. And I'm glad Richard brought it up because I think that's pretty important, especially probably more so during the school year when you have these events like homecomings or proms or whatever. I mean, is that prevalent, would you say, during the summer as well for teenagers, more or less, maybe the same, or do you see anything, do you see any difference in that from your perspective?
Sure. No, there's clearly a direct correlation between that and graduation parties. And I can almost guarantee that no less than one half of the parents whose kids may be at that house party would not be condoning their children drinking in the first place. So it really opens up an entire can of worms. It's definitely not a good idea.
So it's kind of a thing where it's you got to have some people in the community that are very vigilant and kind of cognizant of what's going on, because there might be some parents that are very on board with not allowing it, and there might be the other parents here and there that are more lax or maybe might look the other way with it.
Sure. And, I want to move on back to the drunk driving, but again, that just sort of touches on when we had Scott Macy here a couple of weeks ago about the concept of arrogance, ignorance, and invincibility. And we're on the front lines. We see it all the time. So nothing really good comes out of that in the first place. My advice would be, unless you're 21, your children shouldn't be drinking. But, to go back earlier to what you're bringing up about the drunk driving.
So and that's, as you mentioned, so even if you are, if you're of age and you're over 21, obviously you can still get in just as much trouble. If you decide to make those bad decisions and you don't plan ahead and you go out and you get in behind the wheel of a vehicle after you've had too much to drink. And then what then? I mean, once that happens and you do get pulled over and you do get stopped, and say a police officer wants to have you submit to a breathalyzer test, the question of whether or not can you refuse that? What happens if you do? What happens when you do take the test and the results? And talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, let's break that down from the beginning. Again, with 4th of July coming up, there's clearly more of an increase in enforcement as it relates to drunk driving and policing in the first place, because the police rightfully so know that there's going to be a lot of drinking over the holidays. Most people that come and retain me, all right, are not necessarily pulled over for what we would call the usual observations of drunk driving, and that would be erratic driving. People swerving all over the road, increasing speed, decreasing speed. In fact, what often we see more often than not is whoever may be driving and has been drinking really being pulled over for a civil infraction. So in your mind, you may be driving fine within the lines of the road, but if you run a stop sign, if you have expired plates, in fact, the police can pull you over for any civil infraction. It doesn't necessarily have to be for signs of intoxication. So when I look at a case, there's generally speaking 2 areas that we look at from a defense standpoint. And one would be, why were you pulled over? And I think it's fair to say that more than 50% of people that are pulled over on drunk drivings in the first place are really for civil infractions. So the police only need to have reasonable suspicion or probable cause to pull you over. Again, somebody may come into my office and say, Mark, I wasn't even quote unquote drinking and driving. I was pulled over for speeding. I was only doing 5 over. And I said, well, that doesn't necessarily matter because if you are driving your car with a blood alcohol level of 0.08 or higher, or for that matter, the blood alcohol level in your body may have impaired your ability to operate the car, and the police have a valid reason to pull you over, they can start their investigation for drunk driving. At that point, the officer is going to ask you to get out of the car. Usually, it's been my experience, everybody will tell the police officer they've had the proverbial 2 drinks. It's almost written in at least half of the police reports that we read. Then the officer is going to conduct an observation. They're going to look for signs of intoxication, whether that's alcohol on your breath, bloodshot eyes, slurred speech. And then they're going to ask you to get out of the car. And there's a variety of roadside tests that they can administer to you. And they'll go ahead and do that. And they're going to make their observations on whether they believe that you were operating the car while intoxicated, irregardless of the reason why you were pulled over. At that point, they're going to ask you to take what we call a handheld breathalyzer, and then you would blow into that. If the officers, based upon all those observations, have concluded that you've been drinking and driving, they're going to arrest you. They'll probably cite you as well for the reason why they pulled you over. And as I earlier mentioned, it's often a civil infraction. It's not so much being crossing the yellow line and stuff like that. When that happens, I think there's a direct correlation between a higher blood alcohol level. It sort of speaks for itself. From there, they're going to take you to the police station. And at that point, I think there's a whole world of knowledge out there of what I would call barroom lawyers, where I will meet with a client and they'll say, Mark, I didn't take the test because I heard you shouldn't have taken the test, and this is the test at the police station.
Yeah, so education is important, and that's kind of where you come in.
Right. And over the last 20 years, we have seen through technology, fax machines, and emailing, that if you refuse to take the chemical test at the police station, in a matter of less than a minute, the police can request a search warrant through whatever judge is on call in the jurisdiction that you were pulled over. And then the police are going to get a search warrant if you refuse to take their test at the station. And they're going to take you to the nearest hospital, and they're going to draw blood. And as a result of refusing that chemical test, if in fact you refuse that chemical test, you in fact could lose your license, irregardless of the potentiality of being charged with the drunk driving for 1 year for failing to take their test. And you're not going to get around it because they're going to get the search warrant and they're going to take you to the hospital and they're still going to draw blood. So completely separate of being charged with drunk driving, if in fact you don't take the test, the police are going to request a search warrant and they're going to take you to the nearest hospital and they're going to draw blood.
So it's almost kind of like that catch. It's almost kind of like that catch-22. It's like the point is, comply. Don't refuse to take the test. Do what you're asked, but you're telling somebody to remember to do that when it was their impaired judgment that got them into that situation in the first place, and they're probably not going to be using the best judgment. So it's kind of like once you get to that point, it could be too late. The best point is really to try to plan ahead, as we said. But assuming they don't, and assuming all that goes down, they refuse, they get arrested, all of those things, then what? Then what's the next step? I mean, they're calling you, and what are the next steps there? And how do you, counsel and help just in a general sense? What is your role in this, trying to help people through these scenarios?
Sure. And the last thing I'll say about taking the test, the individual that doesn't take the test in the first place has probably been drinking. So if you have nothing to hide, you would take the test.
Right.
If in fact you only had 2 glasses of wine, and without getting into the blood alcohol level, which is an entirely different topic, you should take the test. But if you don't, they're going to issue a search warrant, and then you're going to be probably left with a suspended license for a year, absent hiring myself or another attorney to do an implied consent hearing. Now, as it relates to your question, there's, in essence, we can look at 4 degrees of drunk driving. If you are under 21 and you are consuming alcohol, that can be considered a zero tolerance drunk driving offense. If It is your first offense. The law breaks it down this way, Doug. It is illegal to operate your car above a .08 blood alcohol level. Period. It doesn't, once the police have had an opportunity and have pulled you over for a legal reason, above a .08 is in fact an operating while intoxicated. You could be below a .08, and if for blood alcohol level purposes, and you have been consuming alcohol, and the alcohol did affect your ability to operate the car, you could be found guilty of a lesser charge of operating while impaired. So there's many degrees, and here they are. You could be charged with operating while intoxicated. You could be charged with operating while impaired. You could, if in fact you have had a prior offense within 7 years, you could be charged with a operating while intoxicated second offense. You could, if you've had 3 in a lifetime, that's changed over the last 10 years. It used to be that if you were charged with 3 drunk drivings within 10 years, that would be a felony. Now, if you have 3 drunk drivings in a lifetime, the third one, you could be charged with a felony. And that's sort of left to the city that it occurred in and or the county where it may have happened and the prosecutor's judgment whether they're going to charge you with a felony or not. If you've had 3 under 10 years, there's a very high probability you're going to be charged with a felony. If you've had 3 over a 25 or a 30-year lifespan, you may be charged with the first offense, but that varies from county to county, city to city.
I was going to say, so that's a little bit of discretion that they have to determine, how out of control you are. If you've had 3 that are relatively close together, they're more likely to be harsher about it than if you've had them over the course of, 25 years.
Correct.
Okay.
So as it relates to the varying charges, on a first offense, operating while intoxicated, again, this varies from city to city, county to county, on how the prosecutor may handle the case. The higher the blood alcohol level, the national average is 0.15. You start going above a 0.15, if in fact you were going to be able to work out a plea bargain to a lesser charge of operating while impaired, the prosecutor's going to think twice about offering you that deal. So you're going to want to, again, hire an attorney, put yourself in a good position, be proactive, get yourself in some form of alcohol awareness classes at a minimum. If in fact this was just a prelude to shining light on a serious alcohol problem, you may want to get into outpatient therapy or, for that matter, inpatient. The more drunk driving's on your record, the higher degree of counseling that are going to be required to put you in a better position with the court. When it comes to actually potentially going to trial on a case like this, unless there is I always break it down to 2 types of cases. The vast majority of drunk drivings are damage control cases, trying to work out a plea agreement to minimize the fines and costs, the potentiality of incarceration, the intrusion on your freedom in your life so that you can work, so that you can get to school. That's from the damage control. There are some cases, especially when you're dealing with a blood alcohol level that's under a 0.10, maybe a 0.06, 0.07. Sometimes if you are below a 0.08, it's a case that we would have a longer discussion with the client as it relates maybe to going to trial in that matter.
Gotcha. All right. Well, that's good to know. And actually, we have a link in the comments here to your website where they can find out a lot more information about the different laws that relate to alcohol-related crimes and what you need to know. You should click on that link here in the comments, and we'll also put up the link to subscribe to your YouTube channel. Mark's YouTube channel will have the replay of this broadcast available there, as well as other episodes of Ask the Attorney. You can continue to comment, ask further questions. This will be up and available. And I think that about does it for this episode, Mark. I think we're about out of time for today. But thank you to the live viewers that tuned in. Thanks for the questions, and feel free to reach out with more going forward. Mark, if you have anything to add, I think we're good.
No, thank you, Dave, Doug. I appreciate it.
All right. Great job. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you all again for the next episode of Ask the Attorney. Have a great day and be safe this 4th of July.
Thank you.